The mahogany conference room at Sterling and Associates smelled like old money and newer lies. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, where autumn leaves fell like gold coins onto paths walked by people who'd never inherit $800 million. But someone in this room was about to. Keisha Morrison sat in a leather chair that cost more than her monthly rent, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect despite 30 years of scrubbing floors and folding laundry. 58 years old, with silver threading through her natural hair pulled back in a dignified bun. Wearing her best church dress navy blue with pearl buttons, she looked like what she was. A woman who'd spent 3 decades serving a family that never truly saw her. Across the table sat that family, the Whitmore clan. Old money, older grudges. Victoria Whitmore Chen, 42, CEO of her late father's real estate empire, sat rigid in Chanel that cost more than Keisha earned in 6 months. Her brother, Preston Whitmore, 38, venture capitalist with a cocaine habit his family pretended not to notice, drummed manicured fingers against Italian leather. Their mother, Margaret Whitmore, 71, dripped diamonds and disdain in equal measure. They were here for the reading of Richard Whitmore's will. The patriarch who'd built a billion-dollar fortune in Manhattan real estate. The man who'd died 3 weeks ago in his sleep, peacefully, in the penthouse Keisha had cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 decades. Attorney David Sterling adjusted his reading glasses. 60 years old, Harvard Law. He'd handled Whitmore family legal matters for 2 generations. What he was about to read would end that relationship permanently. "Before we begin," Sterling said, his voice measured, "I want to make clear that Richard Whitmore was of completely sound mind when he executed this will 6 months ago. I have 3 psychiatric evaluations confirming his mental competence, all dated and notarized." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Why would you need 3 psychiatric evaluations?" Sterling didn't answer. He just opened the document. "I, Richard Allen Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament." His voice was steady, professional. "To my daughter Victoria, I leave my complete collection of first edition books, valued at approximately $2 million, and my gratitude for building the company I started." Victoria's jaw tightened. Books. He'd left her books. "To my son Preston, I leave my art collection, valued at approximately $3 million, and my hope that he finds the peace I could never give him." Preston's drumming fingers stopped. "Art, not the penthouse, not the cash reserves, art. To my wife Margaret, I leave the Greenwich estate, all furnishings included, and lifetime maintenance paid from a trust fund I've established for this purpose." Margaret's face had gone pale. The Greenwich estate was worth maybe $15 million. Richard's fortune was worth $800 million. Where was the rest going? Sterling took a breath. "To Keisha Elizabeth Morrison, my employee of 30 years, I leave the remainder of my estate. All liquid assets, all remaining real property, all shares in Whitmore Properties, all investment portfolios. Estimated total value, $807 million. The silence was absolute. Then Preston exploded. "That's insane. He's leaving $800 million to the fucking Maid." "Preston." "Language," Margaret hissed, but her voice shook. Victoria stood slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury. "This is clearly evidence of dementia, diminished capacity. He was 81 years old. She obviously manipulated him." Sterling remained calm. "As I mentioned, I have 3 independent psychiatric evaluations. I don't care if you have 30. Victoria's voice cracked with rage. "No man in his right mind leaves his entire fortune to his housekeeper. while his own children get table scraps. Keisha hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Her hands remained folded in her lap, but something had changed in her eyes. Something that had been hidden for 3 decades was finally visible. Strength. Sterling pulled out another document. Richard anticipated this reaction. He left a letter to be read in the event of any legal challenge to this will. Would you like me to read it? Yes, Margaret said quietly. Read it. Sterling opened an envelope sealed with red wax. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Richard Whitmore's distinctive handwriting. To my family, Sterling read, if you're hearing this, you've challenged my will. You're demanding to know why I left my fortune to Keisha Morrison instead of you. The answer is simple, because she earned it, and because she's been protecting someone that you never knew existed. Victoria's face went white. What does that mean? But Keisha had already stood. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority none of them had ever heard from her before. It means, she said quietly, that for 30 years I've been raising Richard Whitmore's son, his real heir, the one he never told you about. The mahogany conference room, with its $800 million view, fell silent as a grave, because the real story wasn't about an inheritance. It was about a secret that had been hidden in plain sight for 3 decades. And Keisha Morrison, the woman they treated as invisible, was about to make them see everything. Victoria's laugh was sharp, brittle. You're insane. My father didn't have another son. This is exactly the kind of delusion that proves diminished capacity. Actually, Sterling interjected, pulling out another file. I have documentation that supports Miss Morrison's claim, birth certificate, DNA test results, and a notarized affidavit from Richard himself. He slid the documents across the table. Preston grabbed them first, scanning frantically. His face went from disbelief to shock to something darker. This says, Maria Santos. Who the hell is Maria Santos? Keisha's voice remained steady. She was the housekeeper before me. She worked for your father for 5 years. And 31 years ago, she got pregnant. Margaret's hand went to her throat. That's impossible. Richard would never. Your husband had an affair, Mrs. Whitmore, Keisha said, not unkindly. Maria Santos was 24 years old. She was beautiful, kind, and your husband was lonely in a marriage that had been cold for years. I'm not defending what he did. I'm just telling you what happened. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. Even if this is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, where is this supposed son? Why haven't we ever seen him? Because, Keisha said quietly, Maria died giving birth to him. Complications from preeclampsia. She hemorrhaged in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. She was gone before they could save her. The room went silent. Richard was devastated, Keisha continued. He'd gotten a young woman pregnant, and she died because of it. He couldn't bring the baby into his home. You were 8 years old then, Victoria. Preston was 4. Margaret, you were already suspicious, already watching him. He knew bringing home a mixed-race baby would destroy what was left of his marriage and traumatize his children. So what did he do? Preston asked, his voice hollow. He came to me. Keisha's voice carried the weight of 3 decades. I'd just started working for the Whitmores. I was 27 years old. I'd lost my own baby 6 months earlier, stillborn at 38 weeks. My marriage had fallen apart from the grief. I had nothing left except a job cleaning houses for people who barely knew my name. She looked at each of them in turn. Richard offered me a deal. He'd pay me triple my salary, give me a private apartment rent-free, cover all expenses for the baby. In exchange, I would raise his son as my own, tell everyone the child was mine from a previous relationship. keep the secret until Richard decided it was time to reveal the truth. "That's kidnapping," Victoria said. "That's fraud. That's Keisha. That's survival." Keisha interrupted, her voice harder now. Maria Santos had no family in this country, no one to claim her baby. Richard could have put him in the foster system, could have had him adopted by strangers. Instead, he made sure his son was raised with love, with resources, with every advantage. And I got to be a mother to a child who needed me as much as I needed him. Sterling opened another file. The arrangement was documented. Miss Morrison signed a contract agreeing to raise the child, whose name is Marcus Allen Morrison Whitmore. In exchange, Richard established a trust fund that paid her $80,000 annually, far more than a housekeeper's salary. He also paid for Marcus's private school education, his college tuition at Cornell, and his current position as a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. Preston's face had gone gray. A pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai. "He's 31 years old," Keisha said, and for the first time, pride crept into her voice. "He graduated top of his class. He's saved more lives in the past 5 years than most doctors save in a lifetime. And he has no idea that Richard Whitmore was his biological father." That stopped everyone. "He doesn't know?" Margaret whispered. "No," Keisha said. "Richard and I agreed that Marcus would be told the truth on his 32nd birthday. That date is next month. But Richard died before he could tell him himself." She pulled out her phone and brought up a photo. A tall, handsome man in surgical scrubs, dark skin, his mother's eyes, but something in the structure of his face that was unmistakably Whitmore. She slid the phone across the table. Victoria stared at the photo, at the brother she'd never known existed, at the man who'd just inherited everything she thought was hers. "This is insane," she said, but her voice had lost its conviction. Sterling pulled out the DNA results. "We ran genetic testing 3 months ago when Richard updated his will. Marcus provided a DNA sample for what he believed was a routine medical study. The paternity match is 99.97%. Marcus Allen Morrison Whitmore is Richard Whitmore's biological son. Then why," Preston demanded, "why leave everything to her? If this Marcus is the real heir, why not leave it directly to him?" Keisha's smile was sad. "Because Richard knew what would happen. He knew you'd challenge the will, claim diminished capacity, tie everything up in court for years. But if he left it to me, with clear instructions that I hold it in trust for Marcus until he's ready to claim his inheritance, then it's protected." She stood, gathering her purse. "The will is ironclad. 3 psychiatric evaluations. Video testimony from Richard recorded 6 months ago. A paper trail going back 31 years documenting every payment, every decision, every detail of our arrangement. You can challenge it if you want, but you'll lose." "We'll see about that," Victoria said coldly. "Yes," Keisha replied, "we will." But what Victoria Whitmore didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Keisha Morrison had been documenting something else for 30 years. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every time they treated her as less than human, and she was about to use it to destroy them completely. As Keisha walked out of Sterling and Associates, leaving the Whitmore family in chaos behind her, she pulled out her phone and sent a single text message to Marcus. "We need to talk. It's about your father." 3 decades of secrets were about to unravel, and the Whitmore family, who'd spent their lives believing money bought them immunity from consequences, was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Some debts can't be paid with cash. Some truths can't be buried with lawyers. And some women, the ones you never bothered to see, turn out to be the most dangerous people in the room. Keisha Morrison rode the subway home to her rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, the same apartment Richard had paid for 3 decades ago, the one the Whitmores never knew existed. The one where she'd raised Marcus, where she'd helped him with homework, where she'd celebrated his acceptance to Cornell, where she'd cried tears of pride when he finished his medical residency. The apartment where, hidden in a fireproof safe, she kept 30 years of documentation. She unlocked her door and found Marcus already waiting. He had his own key. He still visited twice a week for dinner, even though he was a successful surgeon with his own life, his own apartment. Some bonds didn't break just because a child grew up. Marcus looked up from his phone, concern etched on his face. 31 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, with his mother Maria's dark eyes and his father's sharp intelligence. He'd grown into a man both his biological parents would have been proud of. Mom, he said he'd always called her Mom, and Keisha had never corrected him, because in every way that mattered, she was, "What's going on? Your text scared me." Keisha set down her purse. 30 years of secrets sat heavy on her shoulders, but Richard's death had finally given her permission to set that burden down. "Baby," she said quietly, "I need to tell you about your father, your real father." Marcus's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "I thought my father was never in the picture. You always said I lied." The words came out soft but clear. "I lied to protect you, to protect him, to protect a secret that's been eating at me for 31 years. She pulled out the safe from her bedroom closet. Inside were documents Richard had given her decades ago, birth certificates, DNA results, and a letter, sealed, addressed to Marcus in Richard's handwriting. "Your biological father's name was Richard Whitmore," Keisha said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "He was a billionaire real estate developer. He died 3 weeks ago. And he left his entire fortune, $800 million, to you." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her like she'd started speaking a language he didn't understand. "Your biological mother was Maria Santos," Keisha continued. "She was a housekeeper, like me. She and Richard had an affair. She got pregnant with you, and she died giving birth because of complications. Richard's family doctors should have caught, but didn't, because she was afraid to tell them she was pregnant." Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, but he still didn't speak. "Richard couldn't bring you into his home. He had a wife, 2 other children. It would have destroyed his family. So he asked me to raise you, to love you, to give you the life he couldn't." Keisha's voice cracked. "And I did, because 6 months before you were born, I lost my own baby. And Richard knew that. He knew I had all this love with nowhere to put it. So we made a deal." She handed him the sealed letter. "He wanted to tell you himself. He planned to, on your 32nd birthday next month. But he died before he could, so he left you this. And he left me his entire estate, to hold in trust for you until you're ready." Marcus opened the letter with shaking hands. Keisha watched him read his father's words, words she'd never seen, words Richard had kept private for this exact moment. When Marcus finished, he looked up at Keisha with red eyes and asked the only question that mattered. "Did he love me?" "Yes," Keisha said without hesitation. "He loved you so much it broke him to keep you secret. But he also loved you enough to make sure you had the best life possible, even if he couldn't be part of it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "His other children, do they know about me?" "As of 2 hours ago, yes. They found out during the will reading." "How did they take it?" Keisha's smile was grim. About as well as you'd expect when you tell rich people their inheritance just went to the brother they never knew existed. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I have siblings. Older siblings who probably hate me. Half-siblings, Keisha corrected. And yes, they already tried to challenge the will. Claimed diminished capacity. Will they win? No. Keisha's voice was steel. Richard documented everything. 3 psychiatric evaluations, video testimony, a paper trail going back 31 years. They can't touch it. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn street where he'd grown up, where he'd played basketball with neighborhood kids, where he'd studied for his medical boards, where he'd become who he was. I don't want the money, he said quietly. Keisha had expected this. Then give it away, fund hospitals, start scholarships, build housing for people who need it. But don't reject it just because it comes with complicated history. Your father wanted you to have it. Use it to do good. Marcus turned back to her. Did you know? All this time, did you know he was going to leave everything to me? No, Keisha admitted. I thought maybe he'd leave you something. A trust fund. Enough to pay off your med school loans, maybe buy a house. I had no idea he'd leave you everything. But you raised me anyway, for 30 years. Even though you didn't know what was coming. I raised you because I loved you, Keisha said simply. The money was never the point. Marcus crossed the room and hugged her. And Keisha held her son, not her biological son, but her son in every way that mattered, and let herself cry for the first time since Richard had died. But the moment was interrupted by her phone buzzing. A text from David Sterling, the attorney. Victoria Whitmore just filed a lawsuit. Fraud, undue influence, elder abuse. Court date in 3 weeks. She's going for full invalidation of the will. This is going to get ugly. Keisha showed Marcus the message. His expression hardened. What do we do? Keisha thought about Victoria Whitmore, about the woman who'd snapped her fingers at Keisha for 30 years, who'd never once asked her name or said thank you, who'd treated her like furniture. She thought about the documentation she'd kept. Every interaction, every cruelty, every moment when the Whitmores had revealed exactly who they really were. We fight, Keisha said, and we make sure they never underestimate the help again. If you've ever been invisible to people who should have seen you, drop a comment. Tell us about someone who treated you like you didn't matter. Because this story is about to show them that the people they ignore are often the ones who hold all the power. The lawsuit hit the news cycle like a grenade. Billionaire's children fight Maid over $800 meters inheritance. Whitmore family claims housekeeper manipulated dying patriarch, secret son or sophisticated scam. Legal battle for Manhattan fortune. The media loved it. Wealthy white family versus working class black woman. Old money versus new revelations. It had everything except the truth. Because what the press didn't know, what Victoria and Preston Whitmore didn't know, was that Keisha Morrison hadn't spent 30 years just raising Richard's secret son. She'd spent 30 years documenting everything. 3 weeks later, they sat in New York Supreme Court. Judge Patricia Chen presiding. The Whitmores had hired Blackstone Legal Group, Manhattan's most expensive law firm. 6 attorneys in $1,000 suits, armed with depositions and psychiatric experts, ready to testify that $800 million gifts to housekeepers proved mental incompetence. Keisha and Marcus sat with David Sterling and 2 associates, modest by comparison. But Sterling had something the Blackstone team didn't: truth, and 30 years of receipts. Victoria's lead attorney, James Morrison, no relation to Keisha, though the name coincidence wasn't lost on anyone, stood to make his opening statement. Your Honor, This case is about a vulnerable elderly man, manipulated by someone in a position of trust. Richard Whitmore was 81 years old when he executed this will. He'd recently been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. Objection, Sterling interrupted. That's factually incorrect and misleading. Mr. Whitmore's medical records show no Alzheimer's diagnosis. He had mild age-related memory issues, completely normal for his age, which 3 separate psychiatric evaluations confirmed did not impact his decision-making capacity. Judge Chen nodded. Sustained. Mr. Morrison, stick to facts you can prove. Morrison barely paused. What we can prove, Your Honor, is that Keisha Morrison systematically isolated Richard Whitmore from his family. She controlled his schedule, monitored his communications, and created a dependency that she exploited to extract the largest gift to a domestic employee in New York legal history. He pulled up a PowerPoint presentation, photos of Richard and Keisha together, at doctor's appointments, at the lawyer's office, at the bank. This woman, Morrison said, pointing at Keisha, spent 30 years positioning herself as indispensable. And when Richard Whitmore was at his most vulnerable, she convinced him to disinherit his own children in favor of a fantasy, a supposed secret son, whose existence she cannot adequately prove. We have DNA evidence, Sterling countered. DNA evidence that could have been obtained through any number of means. Hair from a brush, saliva from a glass. Your Honor, we're not even certain this Marcus Morrison Whitmore is who he claims to be. We've requested our own DNA testing, which the respondents have refused. We haven't refused anything, Sterling said calmly. Marcus Morrison Whitmore has agreed to independent DNA testing. Results should be available within 48 hours. That stopped Morrison for a moment. He'd clearly expected resistance. Judge Chen made a note. Continue. Morrison regrouped. Even if DNA confirms biological relation, that doesn't prove Richard Whitmore was of sound mind when he made this bequest. It doesn't explain why a man would leave his entire fortune to a housekeeper. She wasn't just a housekeeper, Marcus said suddenly, standing. She was my mother. Judge Chen looked at him. Mr. Morrison Whitmore, please sit down. You'll have your chance to testify. With respect, Your Honor, I need to say this now. Marcus's voice was steady but emotional. I'm a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. I've performed over 200 successful surgeries on children. I graduated top of my class from Cornell. I've published research in 3 major medical journals, and none of that would have happened without Keisha Morrison. He looked at Victoria and Preston, who stared back with cold hostility. I didn't know Richard Whitmore was my biological father until 3 weeks ago. I thought I was Keisha's son, that my father had left before I was born. Keisha worked 3 jobs to put me through private school. She stayed up nights helping me study. She taught me that intelligence and hard work mattered more than money or name. His voice hardened. So yes, Richard Whitmore left his fortune to her, because she earned it. 30 years of raising a son he couldn't acknowledge publicly. 30 years of keeping a secret that would have destroyed his family. 30 years of being treated as invisible by people who should have shown her basic human respect. He turned to Judge Chen. I don't need the inheritance, Your Honor. I have a good career. I make a comfortable living. If this court decides the will is invalid, I'll walk away. But what I won't do is stand here and let anyone call Keisha Morrison a manipulator or a fraud. She's the most honest person I've ever known. Judge Chen was silent for a moment. Then she looked at Morrison. Mr. Morrison, do you have evidence of manipulation beyond circumstantial inference? Morrison shuffled papers. We have testimony from household staff that Keisha Morrison was unusually close to Richard Whitmore in his final years, 31 years, Keisha said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Not his final years, she continued, standing now. 31 years. From the day Maria Santos died until the day Richard passed. 31 years of raising his son, of keeping his secret, of watching his other children treat me like I was less than human while I smiled and cleaned their messes and never said a word. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. You want to know why Richard left me his fortune, Mr. Morrison? Because I was the only person in his life who loved him for who he was, not what he could give me. I was the only person who knew all his secrets and never judged him. I was the only person who saw him cry when Marcus graduated medical school, because he was so proud of the son he could never claim. She opened her bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal. And because for 31 years, I documented every interaction I had with the Whitmore family. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment when they proved exactly who they were. Victoria's face went pale. What is that? Evidence, Keisha said simply. She handed the journal to Sterling, who began reading entries aloud. December 14th, 2010. Victoria Whitmore told me to learn English because I asked if she wanted her dry cleaning delivered or hung in her closet. January 6, 2011. Preston Whitmore called me the help when introducing me to his friends, despite knowing my name for 12 years at that point. Sterling flipped pages. August 23, 2015. Margaret Whitmore told me I was lucky to work for people like them after I asked for a single day off to attend Marcus's college graduation. She denied the request. He kept reading, page after page, year after year. 31 years of casual cruelty, documented in precise detail. September 3, 2018. Victoria Whitmore accused me of stealing her jewelry, which she later found in her own car. She never apologized. March 19, 2020. Preston Whitmore offered me $200 to clean up vomit after one of his parties, laughing that it was more than I made in a week anyway. It wasn't. But he'd never bothered to ask what Richard actually paid me. The courtroom was silent except for Sterling's voice. October 7, 2022. Richard Whitmore told me he was updating his will. He said, "They'll never understand why I'm doing this. But you've earned more than money. You've earned justice." Sterling closed the journal. Your Honor, Keisha Morrison didn't manipulate Richard Whitmore. She endured 31 years of mistreatment from his family while raising the son he couldn't acknowledge. Richard left her his fortune not because she tricked him, but because she was the only person in his life who deserved it. Judge Chen looked at Victoria and Preston. Do the plaintiffs wish to respond? Victoria's attorney whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head, her face rigid with fury and humiliation. No, Your Honor, Morrison said finally. But we reserve the right to depose Miss Morrison about these alleged incidents. They're not alleged, Keisha said quietly. I have witnesses. Other household staff who saw and heard the same things. I have text messages from Richard where he apologized for his family's behavior. I have 3 decades of evidence that the Whitmore children treated me as less than human, and I documented all of it because Richard told me to, because he knew this day would come, because he knew they'd challenge the will, and he wanted to make absolutely certain they'd lose. She looked directly at Victoria. You called me the help for 31 years. You never learned my last name. You never asked about my life. You treated me like I was invisible. So yes, Richard left me his fortune, not because I manipulated him, but because you showed him, every single day, exactly who you really were. Victoria stood abruptly. This is insane, you can't possibly. But Judge Chen held up her hand. Miss Whitmore, I suggest you sit down and let your attorney handle this. Victoria sat, but her hands were shaking with rage. Judge Chen looked at the documentation Sterling had submitted. 31 years of journals, supporting testimony from other household staff, text messages from Richard, medical records proving he was mentally competent, DNA results confirming Marcus's paternity. I'm prepared to make a preliminary ruling, she said. But first, I want to hear from Marcus Morrison Whitmore, under oath. Marcus stood and was sworn in. Judge Chen looked at him directly. Mr. Morrison Whitmore, did you know about this inheritance before Richard Whitmore's death? No, Your Honor. I found out 3 weeks ago. Did you ever ask Keisha Morrison about your biological parents? Yes, many times when I was younger. She told me my mother died in childbirth and my father wasn't in the picture. I believed her because I had no reason not to. How do you feel about learning Richard Whitmore was your biological father? Marcus took a breath. Confused, angry that he never told me, sad that I never got to know him as a father, but also grateful that he gave me to Keisha because she's an incredible mother, and I wouldn't trade my childhood with her for anything. And the inheritance? I don't want it for myself, Your Honor, but I want Keisha to have it, because she earned it. 31 years of sacrifice, of love, of enduring treatment that no one should have to endure. If this court decides the will is valid, I'll put the money into a foundation. Medical research, scholarships for kids like me who grew up without advantages, housing for working families, things that would make both my mothers proud, Maria Santos and Keisha Morrison. Judge Chen made notes. Then she looked at Victoria and Preston. Does either plaintiff wish to testify? Neither. Moved. Very well. Judge Chen closed her file. I'll issue a full ruling within 48 hours. But I'll say this now. Everything I've seen suggests Richard Whitmore knew exactly what he was doing. And while I understand the plaintiff's shock at learning about a previously unknown sibling, shock is not grounds to invalidate a will. She looked at Keisha. Miss Morrison, you're dismissed. I'll see all parties back here in 2 days for my final ruling. As they walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. Miss Morrison, do you think you'll win? How does it feel to go from maid to millionaire? Do you feel guilty taking money from Richard Whitmore's real children? Keisha stopped on the courthouse steps. Marcus stood beside her, Sterling behind them. She looked directly into the cameras. I don't feel guilty, she said clearly. I raised a good man. I kept a promise. And I endured 31 years of being invisible to people who should have seen me. Richard Whitmore gave me this inheritance not because I asked for it, but because I earned it. And if the court agrees, I'm going to use every dollar to help people who've been treated the way I was. People who work hard, who sacrifice, who raise other people's children and clean other people's homes and never get acknowledged for the value they bring to the world. She smiled, and it wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who'd just won a war that had lasted 3 decades. The Whitmores called me the Help for 31 years. Now they're about to learn that the Help has a name, a voice, and 800 million reasons to never be invisible again. The clip would go viral within hours. The story would dominate news cycles for weeks. But the real story, the one that mattered, was still unfolding, and it was about to get even more complicated. The ruling was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m. Tuesday night at 9:47 p.m. Keisha's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something instinct, paranoia, 31 years of learning to pay attention to details made her pick up. Miss Morrison, a woman's voice, professional, nervous. My name is Jennifer Park. I'm a senior associate at Blackstone Legal. I need to speak with you. Alone. Tonight. Keisha's grip tightened on the phone. If this is about the case, you should talk to my attorney. It's not about the case, it's about Victoria Whitmore and what she's planning to do tomorrow. I'm listening. Not over the phone. There's a coffee shop on Amsterdam and 72nd. Can you meet me there in 1 hour? Every instinct told Keisha this was a trap. But another instinct, the one that had kept her and Marcus safe for 31 years, told her this woman was terrified. 1 hour, Keisha agreed. The coffee shop was nearly empty. Jennifer Park sat in a back corner booth, nursing a cold Americano with shaking hands. Late 30s, Korean American, expensive suit that couldn't hide her obvious distress. Keisha slid into the booth across from her. You have 10 minutes. Jennifer didn't waste time. Victoria Whitmore is planning to present new evidence tomorrow. Evidence that she believes will destroy your credibility and invalidate the will. What kind of evidence? Financial records showing that you deposited large sums of cash into your personal account over the past 30 years. Sums that don't match the salary Richard paid you on paper. Keisha went very still. The money Richard gave me to raise Marcus was documented. It was part of our agreement. I know that. You know that. But Victoria's team has found a way to make it look like you were embezzling. They're going to argue that you were stealing from Richard for decades, and that when he discovered it, you manipulated him into changing his will to cover up your crimes. That's insane. It's also exactly the kind of narrative that plays well to a judge who's already skeptical about $800 million gifts to housekeepers. Jennifer leaned forward. They have bank statements, deposit records. They're going to paint you as a thief who spent 30 years stealing from a trusting old man. Keisha's mind raced. Richard documented everything. The payments were legal, part of our contract. The contract that says you were paid $80,000 a year to raise his secret son. The son that Victoria's team is going to argue doesn't actually exist, because you fabricated the whole story to justify embezzling millions. We have DNA evidence, which they'll claim you obtained fraudulently. Jennifer's voice was urgent. I've seen their strategy. It's brilliant and it's ruthless. They're going to destroy your credibility piece by piece. And if they succeed, the judge might order a full forensic audit, which means Marcus gets dragged through the mud, which means Richard's memory gets destroyed, which means everyone loses except the lawyers. Keisha studied the woman across from her. Why are you telling me this? You work for Victoria. Jennifer looked down at her coffee. Because I'm the one who found the bank records. And when I presented them to Victoria, she smiled. Not a relieved smile. Not a justice-served smile. A cruel smile. She said, and I quote, "Finally we can put this uppity black woman back in her place." The words hung in the air like poison. I recorded it, Jennifer continued, on my phone. Because I realized in that moment that this case isn't about the will. It's about Victoria Whitmore punishing you for daring to be more than what she decided you could be. She pulled out her phone and played the audio. Victoria's voice was clear, sharp, venomous. "Finally, we can put this uppity black woman back in her place. My father might have been senile enough to leave her money, but I'm going to make sure everyone knows what she really is. A thief who stole from a dying old man." Keisha felt rage building in her chest, but her voice stayed level. You could lose your job for this. Your career. I know, Jennifer's hands were shaking. But I became a lawyer to fight for justice, not to help rich people destroy working-class women because of racism and ego. So I'm giving you a choice. You can use this recording to destroy Victoria's credibility tomorrow, or you can let her destroy yours. Why not just quit? Walk away? Because I signed an NDA. If I quit now, Blackstone will bury me in lawsuits for the rest of my life. But if you introduce this recording as evidence, it becomes part of the public record, and I become a whistleblower, not a traitor. Keisha took the phone, listened to the recording 3 times. Each time, Victoria's voice got uglier. There's something else, Jennifer said quietly. Victoria's been hiring private investigators. They've been following Marcus, taking photos, looking for anything they can use against him. Drug use, affairs, malpractice claims, anything. They won't find anything, Keisha said firmly. Marcus is a good man. I know, which is why they're getting desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. Jennifer met her eyes. Watch your back, Miss Morrison. Both of you. Because if Victoria can't win this legally, she might try other methods. Keisha stood. Thank you for this, truly. Don't thank me yet. Using that recording will start a war. Victoria won't just lose the case. She'll lose everything, her reputation, her credibility, possibly her position at the company. She'll come after you with everything she has. Let her try, Keisha said quietly. I've survived 31 years of her cruelty. I can survive whatever comes next. Keisha called an emergency meeting with Sterling and Marcus at midnight. They listened to the recording in Sterling's office, the city lights of Manhattan glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. When it finished, Marcus looked physically ill. She actually said that, about you. She's said worse, Keisha replied. Just never on tape before. Sterling was already making notes. This changes everything. We introduce this tomorrow. Victoria's entire case collapses. The judge will see this for what it is, a racially motivated attack disguised as a legal dispute. But, Keisha heard the hesitation in his voice, but it will destroy her publicly. Her career, her reputation, everything. And people that angry, that humiliated, they don't go quietly, they lash out. Marcus stood abruptly. I don't care. She threatened my mother. She called her. He couldn't even finish the sentence. I care, Keisha said quietly. Not because I feel sorry for Victoria, but because I need to know we're doing this for the right reasons. Not revenge, justice. Sterling looked at her. What's the difference? Revenge is about making them hurt. Justice is about making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Keisha met his eyes. If we use this recording, it has to be to protect Marcus's inheritance and Richard's legacy, not to destroy Victoria, even though she's trying to destroy you. Especially because of that. Because if I become like her, even for a moment, then she wins. She proves I'm what she always thought I was, someone who doesn't deserve respect. Marcus shook his head. Mom, she doesn't deserve your mercy. This isn't mercy, it's principle. Keisha turned to Sterling. Can we win without the recording? Sterling considered. It's risky. Their financial evidence is circumstantial, but it's compelling. The judge might order an audit, which would tie everything up for months. Maybe years. And with the recording, we win. Definitively. Tomorrow. Keisha looked at Marcus. At the son she'd raised, the man who'd become a doctor because she'd taught him that healing mattered more than hurting. Use the recording, she said finally. But not to destroy Victoria. Use it to show the judge what this case is really about. And then let's be better than she is. Let's win with dignity. Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. The courtroom was packed. Press in the back. Whitmore family lawyers on one side, Sterling's modest team on the other. Judge Chen took her seat. I'm prepared to issue my ruling, but I understand the plaintiffs have new evidence. Victoria's attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. We have financial records showing. Actually, Sterling interrupted, standing. Before my colleague continues, the defense would like to introduce evidence that directly bears on the plaintiff's motivations in this case. Judge Chen frowned. What kind of evidence? Audio recording of Victoria Whitmore, recorded yesterday evening, discussing her true intentions regarding this lawsuit. Victoria went pale. Her attorney looked confused. Your Honor, we object. This is clearly inadmissible. Play it, Judge Chen said. Sterling played the recording. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom. Finally, we can put this uppity black woman back in her place. My father might have been senile enough to leave her money, but I'm going to make sure everyone knows what she really is, a thief who stole from a dying old man. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Chen's face was stone. Miss Whitmore, did you make that statement? Victoria couldn't speak. Her attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, the context of this recording is unclear. The context, Judge Chen said coldly, appears to be that your client views this case not as a legitimate legal dispute, but as an opportunity to punish someone based on race and class. Is that incorrect? Victoria finally found her voice. That recording was obtained illegally. It's a private conversation, recorded by an employee who witnessed what she believed to be discriminatory intent, Sterling said. Miss Jennifer Park, who's present in this courtroom, will testify under oath that she made this recording because she believed her client was pursuing this lawsuit based on racial animus, not legitimate legal claims. Jennifer stood from the back of the courtroom. I'll testify, Your Honor. Everything Mr. Sterling said is true. Judge Chen looked at Victoria with something approaching disgust. Miss Whitmore, I've practiced law for 32 years. I've seen frivolous lawsuits. I've seen greedy lawsuits. But I've rarely seen a lawsuit so clearly motivated by spite and prejudice. She picked up her gavel. I'm ruling in favor of the defense. Richard Whitmore's will stands as written. All assets passed to Keisha Morrison as trustee for Marcus Morrison Whitmore. The plaintiff's claims of diminished capacity and undue influence are dismissed with prejudice. The gavel came down. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees and court costs to the defense, and I'm referring this recording to the New York Bar Association for investigation into whether Whitmore's legal team participated in pursuing a racially discriminatory lawsuit. Victoria stood, her face twisted with fury and humiliation. This isn't over. Yes, Judge Chen said firmly. It is. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Keisha and Marcus stood in front of a wall of cameras. A reporter shouted, Miss Morrison, how does it feel to win? Keisha looked directly into the camera. It feels like justice, not revenge, justice. What will you do with the money? Build something that honors both my mothers, Maria Santos, who gave me Marcus, and my own mother, who taught me that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from how you treat people when they can't fight back. Do you have any message for the Whitmore family? Keisha paused. This was the moment where she could destroy them publicly, where she could say everything she'd held back for 31 years. Instead, she said, I hope they learn that the people you dismissed today might be the ones holding your future tomorrow. And I hope they find peace. Then she took Marcus's hand, and they walked away from the cameras together. But the real story wasn't over, because 3 blocks away, Victoria Whitmore sat in her car, watching the news coverage on her phone, watching Keisha's grace, her dignity, her victory. And Victoria made a decision that would change everything one final time. 2 months later, Keisha stood in Richard Whitmore's penthouse, her penthouse now looking out at Central Park. The leaves had finished falling. Winter was coming. Marcus was at the hospital, saving lives the way he always had. The $800 million sat in trust, waiting to be transformed into something that mattered. Medical scholarships, housing for working families, research grants for diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored because they weren't profitable enough. Everything was perfect, which was exactly when the doorbell rang. Keisha answered it to find Victoria Whitmore standing in the hallway. No lawyers, no cameras, just a woman who looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 months. "Can I come in?" Victoria asked quietly. Every instinct told Keisha to say no, to slam the door, to call security. But something in Victoria's face, something broken and real, made her step aside. They sat in Richard's study. Victoria looked around at the room where her father had made his fortune, made his mistakes, made his final decisions. "I came to apologize," Victoria said finally. Keisha waited. "Not because my lawyers told me to. They've all quit, by the way. The Bar Association investigation destroyed what was left of my credibility." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "I came because I need you to understand something. I'm listening. My father never loved me," Victoria said quietly. "Not the way he loved you. Not the way he loved Marcus. He loved what I could build, what I could achieve, but he never loved me." "That's not true." "It is true." Victoria's voice cracked. "I spent my entire life trying to earn his approval. I built his company into an empire. I made every decision he would have made. I became him. And he still left everything to you." Keisha felt something unexpected, pity. "Do you know why?" Victoria continued. "It's because you gave him something I never could. You let him be human. You let him make mistakes and still loved him. I only loved the perfect version of him, the successful version, the version that couldn't fail." She pulled out an envelope. "I found this in my father's desk after he died. It's addressed to me. He never sent it. I think he was too afraid." She handed it to Keisha. "I want you to read it, because I think it explains everything." Keisha opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Richard's handwriting, dated 2 years before his death. "My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth. Or I've died before finding it, and you've discovered this letter on your own. I was never the father you deserved. I pushed you to be strong because I was weak. I demanded perfection because I was flawed. I made you into a CEO because I was too cowardly to let you be my daughter. Keisha Morrison has been in my life for 31 years. She raised Marcus, yes, but she also showed me what unconditional love looked like. She never asked me to be more than I was. She just asked me to be honest. You deserved that same love, Victoria, and I failed you. I'm sorry. The inheritance isn't a punishment, it's an apology. I'm giving everything to Marcus because he never had the chance to know me. But I'm hoping that losing the money will give you the chance to know yourself, to discover who you are when you're not trying to be me. I love you, Victoria. I always have. I just never knew how to show it." Dad Keisha looked up to see tears streaming down Victoria's face. "He thought losing the money would free me," Victoria whispered. "And he was right. I lost everything. My inheritance, my reputation, my marriage. Preston told me 3 days ago he's filing for divorce because he can't handle the scandal." She wiped her eyes. But I also lost something else. The need to prove I'm better than everyone. The need to win. The need to be perfect. Victoria stood. I'm not asking for the money back. I don't deserve it. Marcus does. You do. But I wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. About dignity. About justice. About being better than your worst impulses. She walked to the door, then turned back. There's something else you should know about Maria Santos. Keisha's heart stopped. What about her? She didn't die from random complications. She died because our family doctor, the one who should have been monitoring her pregnancy, never examined her. She was too afraid to tell him she was pregnant with my father's baby. And when the preeclampsia started, she tried to hide it because she thought she'd be fired. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper now. I found the records. The doctor noted she'd been showing symptoms for weeks. If he'd just asked her, if he'd just treated her like she mattered, she'd be alive today. Keisha felt tears burning her eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because Marcus deserves to know. His mother didn't die because of bad luck. She died because people like me, people like my family, treated people like her as if their lives didn't matter. Victoria's voice broke completely. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She left before Keisha could respond. That night, Keisha told Marcus everything. About the letter, about Victoria's apology, about what really killed his mother, Maria. Marcus sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked the same question Keisha had asked herself. Do you believe her? The apology? I don't know, Keisha said honestly. But I think she believes it. And maybe that's enough. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text to someone. 5 minutes later, his phone rang. It's Victoria, he said, looking at the screen. Answer it, Keisha said. Marcus answered. Put it on speaker. Marcus? Victoria's voice was tentative. I don't know why I called. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything, I know, Marcus said quietly. Keisha told me. Silence on the other end. I'm starting a foundation, Marcus continued. Medical care for undocumented workers. Free prenatal care. The kind of care that could have saved my mother Maria's life. I'd like you to be on the board. What? Why would you? Because my father's letter was right. This isn't about punishment. It's about building something better. And maybe you can help with that. More silence. Then, I don't deserve that. Probably not, Marcus agreed. But my mother taught me that healing matters more than revenge. So I'm offering you a chance. Take it or don't. That's up to you. He hung up. Keisha looked at her son, not her biological son, but her son in every way that counted, and felt pride swell in her chest. You're a better person than I am, she said. No, Marcus replied. I'm exactly who you raised me to be. 6 months later, the Morrison Santos Foundation opened its doors. Free medical care for undocumented workers, scholarships for children of domestic workers, housing assistance for working families, and on the board of directors, alongside Marcus Morrison Whitmore and Keisha Morrison, sat Victoria Whitmore. Working, learning, slowly becoming someone her father had never taught her to be. Someone who understood that the people serving you aren't beneath you. They're just people, with lives and dreams and worth that exists regardless of how much money they have or what job they do. The inheritance hadn't just changed Keisha and Marcus's lives. It had changed all of them. Because sometimes the most expensive lesson isn't the one you pay for. It's the one that costs you everything you thought mattered before you learned what actually does. And sometimes the woman you called the help for 31 years becomes the person who teaches you what humanity really means.